5 years had passed since that desperate evening when Miguel Santos knocked on the door of the McAllister ranch house, and the transformation was nothing short of remarkable. What had begun as a desperate plea for shelter had evolved into one of the most successful construction companies in the county, and a friendship that had enriched both families beyond measure. McAllister Santos Construction had exceeded everyone's expectations. Word of their quality work and fair dealing had spread throughout the region, and they now employed 12 full-time workers and maintained a waiting list of clients that extended 6 months into the future. Miguel had discovered that he had a natural talent for business, while his construction expertise ensured that every project met the highest standards. The company had built custom homes, renovated historic properties, constructed commercial buildings, and even taken on a few municipal projects for the county government. Their reputation for completing projects on time and within budget had made them the go-to contractor for anyone seeking quality work in the area. But, perhaps more importantly, the business had allowed Miguel to provide opportunities for others who found themselves in difficult circumstances. 3 of their employees were men he had met at job sites who reminded him of his own desperate situation 5 years earlier. He had learned to recognize the signs, the too eager acceptance of any wage, the careful way they handled their tools, the gratitude that went beyond the normal appreciation for steady work. Carlos was now 11 and had become an accomplished horseman under the tutelage of the ranch hands. He split his time between helping with ranch operations and showing a keen interest in construction work. On weekends and summers, he could often be found at job sites, watching Miguel work and asking endless questions about building techniques. Diego, now 9, had developed a passion for cattle that impressed even the most experienced ranchers in the area. James often joked that Diego understood cattle behavior better than men twice his age. The boy had a natural instinct for working with livestock that suggested he might one day take over the ranch operations himself. Sophia, now 6, was the undisputed princess of both the ranch and the construction company. She moved between both worlds with the confidence of someone who belonged everywhere, equally comfortable in her mother's kitchen, Margaret's garden, or perched on Miguel's shoulders at a construction site. Her bilingual abilities had made her an unofficial translator for the family, and her intelligence and curiosity suggested she might be the scholar of the family. Elena had bloomed in their new environment in ways that continually amazed Miguel. Her English had become fluent, and she had developed friendships throughout the community. She had also discovered a talent for interior design, often working with construction clients to help them create beautiful, functional spaces in their new or renovated homes. More significantly, Elena had started a small business of her own, teaching sewing and traditional Mexican cooking to women in the community. What had begun as informal lessons for Margaret and a few neighbors had grown into regular classes held at the community center, bringing additional income to the family while preserving cultural traditions she wanted to pass on to her children. On this particular spring evening, Miguel stood on the porch of their transformed home, watching his family go about their after-dinner routines. The house that had once been a rundown foreman's quarters was now a showcase of craftsmanship and loving attention to detail. Every room reflected both Miguel's construction skills and Elena's eye for creating a warm, welcoming environment. James appeared around the corner of the house, as he often did in the evenings, carrying 2 beers and wearing the satisfied expression of a man who had spent a productive day working with his hands. "How did the Johnson project go today?" James asked, settling into one of the rocking chairs that had become a permanent fixture on the porch. "Finished the kitchen cabinets," Miguel replied, accepting the beer gratefully. "They should be ready to move back in next week." "Mrs. Johnson cried when she saw how the breakfast nook turned out. "Happy tears, I hope." "Definitely happy tears." She said it was exactly what she had dreamed of but never thought she could afford. This had become one of the most satisfying aspects of their business, the ability to provide people with homes that exceeded their expectations while remaining within their budgets. Miguel had learned that careful planning and quality craftsmanship could often accomplish more than throwing money at a project. "I've been thinking about something," James said after a comfortable silence. "Margaret and I aren't getting any younger, and we've been talking about what happens to the ranch when we're gone." Miguel felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. Despite 5 years of friendship and partnership, he sometimes still feared that their good fortune was somehow temporary, that circumstances might change and leave his family vulnerable again. We don't have children of our own, James continued, and, while we have nephews and nieces, none of them have any interest in ranching. They're all city people now, lawyers and doctors and such. He paused to take a sip of his beer, choosing his words carefully. We've been watching your family grow up here, and we've seen how much this place means to all of you. Sophia knows every inch of this ranch, Diego understands the cattle better than most grown men, and Carlos has the work ethic and intelligence to manage any operation he sets his mind to. Miguel remained quiet, sensing that James was building towards something important. What I'm getting at is this: we'd like to make arrangements for your family to inherit the ranch when we're gone. Not just the foreman's position, but ownership of the entire operation. The words hit Miguel like a physical blow. He set down his beer, afraid his hands might be shaking. James, I don't know what to say. That's incredibly generous, but nothing, James interrupted gently. This isn't charity, Miguel. Over the past 5 years, you've proved that you understand what it means to be a steward of the land. You've shown that you can build something lasting, that you can provide opportunities for others, and that you have the values we want to see continued here. James gestured toward the fields where cattle grazed peacefully in the fading light. This ranch has been in my family for 3 generations. Margaret and I always assumed it would go to the 4th generation, but that's not going to happen biologically. Instead, it's going to go to the family that has earned the right to carry it forward. Miguel felt tears threatening and didn't try to hide them. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank us. You've already given us more than you know. We've gotten to watch your children grow up, we've seen you build a successful business, and we've experienced what it's like to have an extended family. That's worth more than money. They sat in companionable silence as the sun set behind the rolling hills of the ranch. Miguel thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, the fear and desperation of those first weeks, the gradual building of trust and friendship, the countless small moments that had woven their lives together. There is one condition, James added with a slight smile. Miguel raised an eyebrow questioningly. We want to stick around long enough to see Carlos graduate from high school and Diego develop into the cattleman he's obviously going to become. And we want to spoil Sophia rotten for at least another decade. I think that can be arranged, Miguel said, his voice thick with emotion. The screen door opened and Elena emerged, followed by the children and Margaret. They had obviously been planning this conversation, because Margaret was carrying a bottle of champagne and Elena had tears in her eyes. Surprise! Sophia shouted, bouncing on her toes with excitement. We're going to own the ranch. Carlos, now old enough to understand the full significance of what was happening, shook James's hand solemnly. I promise I'll take good care of it, he said with the earnestness that only children can manage. Diego simply hugged James around the waist, too overwhelmed to speak. As Margaret popped the champagne and Elena wiped away tears of joy, Miguel reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had led to this moment. A desperate man asking for shelter had somehow evolved into a multi-generational legacy that would provide security and opportunity for his children and grandchildren. I need to tell you all something, Miguel said as they raised their glasses in celebration. 5 years ago, when I knocked on your door, I was asking for one night of shelter. I never imagined that I was actually asking to become part of a family. He looked around at the faces of the people who had become his chosen family, James and Margaret, who had seen potential where others saw only a desperate stranger, Elena, who had supported every risk and celebrated every success, and his children, who would grow up with opportunities he could never have imagined. James, you once told me that success isn't just about what you accumulate, but about what you pass along. Tonight, I understand what you meant. You haven't just given us a ranch, you've given us a legacy and the responsibility to carry it forward. The celebration continued late into the evening, with neighbors and friends arriving to share in the joy of the announcement. The ranch house filled with laughter, music, and the sounds of community that had become such an important part of their lives. As Miguel tucked Sophia into bed that night, she looked up at him with serious eyes. Papa, are we rich now? Miguel considered the question carefully. By any material measure, they were certainly well off. The construction business was thriving, they owned a beautiful home, and they would soon inherit one of the most successful ranches in the county. But that wasn't really what she was asking. Yes, Mija, he said finally. We're rich in all the ways that really matter. We have a home, work that we love, friends who are like family, and opportunities that will last for generations. We're rich in love and hope and the chance to help other people the way we were helped. Good, Sophia said sleepily. Because I want to help people too when I grow up. As Miguel turned off the light and closed her door, he smiled at the recognition that his daughter had already learned the most important lesson of their journey. The true wealth comes not from what you have, but from what you give and how you use your blessings to lift others up. Standing in the hallway of their home, listening to the sounds of his family settling in for the night, Miguel marveled at the distance they had traveled from that desperate evening 5 years ago. They had asked for shelter and been given a future. They had hoped for survival and discovered prosperity. They had sought temporary refuge and found a permanent home. The scared, desperate man who had knocked on a stranger's door was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood that the most important victories in life weren't just about overcoming adversity, but about using those experiences to create something meaningful and lasting that could benefit others for generations to come. Outside their windows, the ranch stretched away into the darkness, peaceful and prosperous under a blanket of stars. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, new chances to build and create and give back to the community that had embraced them. But tonight, they were exactly where they belonged, home, surrounded by love, and secure in the knowledge that their children would inherit not just land and buildings, but the values and relationships that had made their transformation possible. The broken-down truck on the side of the road seemed like something from another lifetime, a distant memory of people they used to be but could barely remember. In its place was this family, community, purpose, and the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing that your life has meaning beyond your own immediate needs. It was, Miguel thought as he joined Elena on the porch for a final look at their ranch under the stars, more than enough for any man to hope for, and exactly what his family deserved. 6 weeks into their new life at the McAllister Ranch, Miguel stood in what would soon be the renovated master bathroom, wiping sweat from his forehead as he admired the progress he had made. The old fixtures were gone, the walls had been stripped to the studs, and new plumbing rough-in was complete. What had once been a cramped, outdated space was being transformed into something functional and beautiful. The work was challenging but satisfying in a way that Miguel had forgotten was possible. James had given him complete creative freedom with the renovations, trusting his judgment on everything from layout changes to material selections. After years of working for contractors who cut corners and prioritized speed over quality, it felt liberating to take the time to do things properly. Elena had settled into their new life with surprising ease. Her English was improving rapidly thanks to daily conversations with Margaret, who had become not just a friend but something approaching family. The older woman had taken Elena under her wing, teaching her about ranch life, introducing her to other women in the community, and helping her navigate the cultural differences that came with their new environment. The children had adapted to ranch life like they had been born to it. Carlos and Diego spent their days exploring the vast property under the watchful eyes of the ranch hands, learning about cattle, horses, and the rhythms of agricultural life. They had started at the local elementary school, where their teachers reported that they were bright, eager students who were making friends quickly despite the language barrier. Baby Sophia had become the unofficial mascot of the entire ranch operation. The cowhands, most of whom were young men far from their own families, doted on her with an affection that surprised everyone. Elena often found herself with unexpected babysitters when she needed to run errands or help Margaret with larger household projects. The transformation in their family's circumstances was remarkable, but Miguel was beginning to understand that the changes went deeper than just material improvements. For the first time in years, he felt like he was building something lasting rather than just getting by. Every day of work on the house was an investment in their future, and every skill he learned about ranch management was preparing him for a career that could provide stability for decades to come. James had been true to his word about teaching Miguel the cattle business. Most afternoons, when the construction work was done, Miguel would join James and the other hands for the daily ranch operations. He learned about rotating cattle between pastures, recognizing signs of illness in the herd, maintaining fencing and water systems, and the dozens of other tasks that kept a ranch operation running smoothly. The learning curve was steep, but Miguel discovered that many of the skills he had developed in construction translated well to ranch work. problem solving, attention to detail, physical stamina, and the ability to work with his hands were all valuable assets in his new environment. One afternoon in late October, as Miguel was installing new kitchen cabinets, James appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee and a serious expression. "Got a minute?" James asked, settling onto a makeshift seat made from a stack of lumber. "Of course," Miguel replied, setting down his drill and accepting the coffee gratefully. "I wanted to talk to you about something," James began. "Tom Morrison called me yesterday. Apparently word has gotten around the county about the quality of work you're doing here. He's been telling people about the renovation, and I've had 3 different neighbors ask if you might be interested in doing some construction work for them." Miguel raised an eyebrows in surprise. "Really? Bill Hendricks wants his barn roof replaced. The Petersons are thinking about adding on to their house. And Sarah Mitchell needs her ranch house completely renovated after the storm damage last spring. All of them specifically asked for the man who's working on my foreman's house." The implications began to sink in as James continued. "I've been thinking about this, and I have a proposition for you. What if, instead of just being my foreman, you became a partner in a construction business? We could call it McAllister Santos Construction. You'd handle the construction side, I'd provide capital and help with the business management." Miguel felt his heart rate increase. The offer was unexpected and potentially life-changing. "I don't understand. Why would you want to do that?" "Because I've seen your work, and I've gotten to know you over the past couple of months," James said simply. "You have skills that are in demand around here, and you have the character to build a business that people will trust. Plus, to be completely honest, the ranch is doing well, but diversification never hurts." James pulled out a folded piece of paper from his shirt pocket. "I had my accountant run some numbers. Based on what I know about construction costs in this area, and assuming we could stay busy about 6 months out of the year with custom projects, we could probably generate enough revenue to pay you a salary equivalent to what I was planning to offer as ranch foreman, plus provide a nice supplemental income for the ranch operation." Miguel studied the numbers, his construction experience allowing him to assess the projections. They looked reasonable, perhaps even conservative. "What about the ranch work?" "We'd hire a foreman, like I originally planned. You could still be involved in the day-to-day operations when construction work is slow, but your primary focus would be building the construction business." The offer was tempting, but Miguel had learned to be cautious about decisions that seemed too good to be true. "Can I think about it? Maybe discuss it with Elena?" "Absolutely. Take your time. This is a big decision, and it affects your whole family." That evening, Miguel and Elena walked around the ranch property after putting the children to bed, discussing the unexpected opportunity that had presented itself. The fall air was crisp, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the vast Texas sky. "It sounds like a wonderful opportunity," Elena said thoughtfully, "but are you sure you want to take on the responsibility of running a business? That's very different from just working for someone else." "I've been thinking about that," Miguel replied. "In some ways, I've been preparing for this my whole career without realizing it. All those years as a foreman taught me about managing projects, dealing with clients, estimating costs, supervising workers. The only thing I don't know much about is the business side, and James would handle that part." They paused by the creek that ran through the property, listening to the gentle sound of water moving over stones. In the distance, they could see the lights of their renovated house, warm and welcoming against the darkness. "What does your heart tell you?" Elena asked. Miguel considered the question carefully. 6 months ago, he would have been thrilled just to have steady employment. Now he was being offered the chance to become a business owner, to build something that could provide for his family for years to come and potentially be passed down to his children. "My heart tells me that James McAllister has already given us more than we could have hoped for," Miguel said. "If he thinks I'm capable of this, then maybe I should trust his judgment." "Then, I think we should do it," Elena said firmly. "We've already taken one big risk by coming here. It worked out better than we ever imagined. Maybe it's time to take another one." The next morning, Miguel found James in the ranch office, a converted room in the main house that served as the headquarters for the cattle operation. Account books, cattle records, and ranch management software filled every available surface. "I've made my decision," Miguel announced. James looked up from a spreadsheet he'd been studying. "And? I'd like to accept your partnership offer, with one condition." "What's that?" "I want to finish the house renovation first, and I want to do it right. This is our home now, and I want it to be something we can be proud of for the rest of our lives." James smiled and extended his hand. "Deal." "And, Miguel? I think this is going to be the start of something really good." Over the following weeks, as Miguel put the finishing touches on their home renovation, the plans for McAllister Santos construction began to take shape. James hired a lawyer to draw up partnership agreements, opened business bank accounts, and began reaching out to their network of potential clients. Miguel found himself energized by the challenge in a way he hadn't experienced since his early days in construction. The difference was that now he wasn't just working to get by, he was building something lasting, something that could provide security and opportunity for his family while contributing to the community that had welcomed them. The house renovation was completed in early December, just in time for their first Christmas in their new home. As Miguel and Elena decorated a tree in their transformed living room, surrounded by their laughing children and the warmth of their own fireplace, Miguel marveled at how completely their lives had changed. The scared, desperate man who had knocked on a stranger's door 6 months ago seemed like a different person entirely. In his place was someone with confidence, purpose, and a future that extended far beyond mere survival. The house around them wasn't just shelter anymore, it was home in the deepest sense of the word, a place where they belonged and where their children could grow up with stability and opportunity. On Christmas Eve, James and Margaret joined the Santos family for dinner in their renovated home. As they sat around the table sharing stories and laughter, Miguel raised his glass of wine in a toast. "To second chances," he said, "and to the kindness of strangers who become family." The toast was echoed around the table, and Miguel caught Elena's eye across the candlelit space. In her smile, he saw the same gratitude and amazement that he felt every day. They had lost everything and found something better than anything they had dared to dream possible. Outside their windows, snow was beginning to fall on the ranch, transforming the familiar landscape into something magical and new. It seemed fitting somehow, this fresh start to match their transformed lives. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight they were exactly where they belonged, surrounded by love and the promise of all the Christmases yet to come in the home they had built with their own hands, and the generosity of friends who had become family. Dawn broke over the McAllister ranch with a golden glow that seemed to promise new beginnings. Miguel woke before the rest of his family, his internal clock still adjusted to the early construction site schedules he had kept for years. For a moment, he lay still in the comfortable bed, wondering if the previous evening had been an elaborate dream brought on by desperation and exhaustion. But then, he heard the gentle lowing of cattle in the distance and smelled coffee brewing somewhere in the house, and he knew it was all real. His family was safe, they had slept in clean beds with full stomachs, and today James McAllister would show him the work that could change their lives forever. Elena stirred beside him, then sat up abruptly as she remembered where they were. Baby Sophia was still sleeping peacefully in the crib, and the boys were curled up together in one of the twin beds like a pair of puppies seeking comfort in each other's presence. "Good morning," Elena whispered in Spanish. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," Miguel replied honestly. "How are you feeling about all this in the light of day?" Elena was quiet for a moment, gazing out the window at the ranch spreading out before them. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Scared that it's too good to be true. Scared that we'll disappoint these people somehow. But also hopeful for the first time since we lost the apartment." Their conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock on the door. "Good morning," came Margaret's voice. "I've got fresh coffee and breakfast ready when you are." No rush, but James is excited to show Miguel around the property. An hour later, after a breakfast that included fresh eggs from the ranch's own chickens, homemade biscuits, and bacon, James led Miguel outside to begin the tour. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the sense of grass, livestock, and that indefinable freshness that came from wide open spaces. The ranch is about 1,500 acres, James explained as they climbed into his pickup truck. "We run about 800 head of cattle, mostly Angus and Hereford. I've got 4 full-time hands plus myself, and we stay pretty busy year-round." As they drove along dirt roads that crisscrossed the property, Miguel was impressed by the obvious prosperity and careful management of the operation. The fencing was in good repair, the pastures were well maintained, and the cattle looked healthy and well fed. This was clearly the result of years of hard work and smart decisions. "There it is," James said, pointing ahead to a house that sat on a small rise overlooking a creek. "The foreman's house. Built it about 15 years ago when I hired Tom Morrison to run the day-to-day operations. Tom retired last spring and moved to town to be closer to his grandchildren." The house was a modest but well-built structure with good bones and obvious potential. It was a single-story ranch style with 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a large covered porch that faced east toward the sunrise. The exterior was weathered but solid, and Miguel could see that with some attention, it could be beautiful. James produced a key and let them inside. The interior told the story of years of bachelor living, functional but uninspiring. The floors were worn linoleum and cheap carpet, the walls needed paint, and the kitchen and bathrooms were dated but serviceable. "As you can see, it needs a lot of work," James said. Tom was a great foreman but not much for home maintenance. "I've been meaning to renovate it before hiring someone new, but I haven't found the right person for the job." Miguel walked through each room carefully, his trained eye assessing the scope of work required. The house had good natural light, solid construction, and a layout that would work well for his family. With proper renovation, it could be a wonderful home. "The electrical is mostly up to code, but some of the wiring in the kitchen needs updating," James continued. "The plumbing works but could use some attention. The biggest jobs are the flooring, painting, and completely redoing both bathrooms. The kitchen could use new cabinets and countertops too." "What's your timeline for all this?" Miguel asked, running his hand along a wall to check for soundness. "I'm in no rush. I'd rather have it done right than done fast. I'm thinking this could be a 6-month project, maybe longer depending on how extensive you want to get with the renovations." They spent the next 2 hours going through the house room by room, with Miguel making mental notes about materials, techniques, and potential challenges. James was clearly knowledgeable about construction, asking intelligent questions and making useful observations. It became obvious that this wouldn't be a situation where Miguel would have to work under the supervision of someone who didn't understand the trade. "Can I ask about the financial arrangement?" Miguel said as they finished their inspection. "Absolutely. I'm thinking $25 an hour for your labor, plus I cover all materials and any tools you don't already have. You and your family can live here rent-free while the work is being done. I'll also pay utilities and provide a monthly allowance for groceries." Miguel did quick math in his head. At 40 hours a week, that was $1,000 weekly, more than he had been making as a foreman in San Antonio. Combined with free housing and utilities, it would allow them to rebuild their savings while providing his family with stability. "That's very generous," Miguel said carefully. "What happens when the renovation is finished?" "If you're interested, and if we work well together, I'd like to offer you the foreman position permanently. The salary would be $60,000 a year plus housing, utilities, and health insurance. You'd be responsible for overseeing the day-to-day operations, managing the other hands, and helping me make decisions about cattle management, land use, and equipment purchases." The offer was beyond anything Miguel had dared to hope for. $60,000 a year was more money than he had ever made, and the benefits package would provide security for his family that had seemed impossible just 24 hours ago. "I have to be honest with you," Miguel said. "I don't know anything about cattle ranching. I'm a construction worker." James smiled. "And I was a bank loan officer before I became a rancher. Skills can be learned if you have the right attitude and work ethic." Tom started as a cowboy who barely knew how to read. By the time he retired, he was one of the most respected cattlemen in the county. They drove back to the main house in comfortable silence, both men lost in thought about the possibilities that lay ahead. When they arrived, they found Elena and Margaret in the kitchen with the children, attempting to make tortillas with Margaret's limited Spanish and Elena's enthusiastic gesturing providing the communication bridge. Carlos and Diego were covered in flour and giggling as they tried to roll the dough, while baby Sofia sat in a high chair that Margaret had retrieved from somewhere, contentedly gumming a piece of soft bread. "How did the house tour go?" Margaret asked. "I think we have the makings of a deal," James replied, looking at Miguel expectantly. Miguel looked at his wife, who was watching him with hopeful eyes. In Spanish, he quickly explained the terms James had offered. Elena's face went through a series of emotions: disbelief, joy, concern, and, finally, determination. "What do you think?" she asked in Spanish. "I think it's the answer to our prayers," Miguel replied. "But it means starting over completely. New town, new life, new work. We've already lost everything we had," Elena said quietly. "This is a chance to build something better." Miguel turned to James and Margaret, who had been waiting patiently for the family conference to conclude. "We would like to accept your offer," he said formally. "And I want you to know that we understand this is a tremendous opportunity. We won't let you down." James extended his hand, and they shook on it. "Welcome to the McAllister Ranch," he said. "I have a feeling this is going to work out well for everyone." The rest of the day was spent in practical arrangements. They returned to the broken-down pickup truck to retrieve their belongings, and James called his mechanic to have the vehicle towed to town for repairs. Miguel was amazed to discover that his few tools, which he had thought might be ruined by weeks of living in the truck, were in better condition than he had hoped. Margaret had clearly been busy while the men were touring the property. When they returned to the foreman's house in the afternoon, they found that she had cleaned it thoroughly and stocked the kitchen with basic groceries and cooking supplies. Clean bedding had been placed in all the bedrooms, and fresh towels hung in the bathrooms. "I know it's not much to look at right now," Margaret said apologetically, "but I thought you might want to move in right away and start making it your own." That evening, as Miguel and Elena tucked their children into beds in their new temporary home, the contrast with the previous night was almost overwhelming. Less than 24 hours ago, they had been sleeping in a broken truck on the side of the road. Now they had a roof over their heads, steady work lined up, and a future that extended far beyond mere survival. "Papa," Carlos said as Miguel kissed him goodnight, "are we going to live here forever?" "I don't know about forever, Mijo," Miguel replied, "but we're going to live here for a long time. Long enough for you to start school here, make friends, and feel at home." After the children were asleep, Miguel and Elena sat on the front porch of their new home, looking out over the ranch in the moonlight. The silence was profound after weeks of truck stops, highway noise, and the constant tension of uncertainty. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong," Elena admitted. "For someone to tell us this was all a mistake." "I know what you mean," Miguel said, taking her hand. "But I think we need to have faith that sometimes good things really do happen to people who need them. The McAllisters are good people, and they need our help as much as we need theirs." As they prepared for bed in their new home, Miguel reflected on the series of events that had brought them to this point. If their truck hadn't broken down on that particular stretch of road, if James McAllister hadn't been the kind of man who would help strangers, if the timing hadn't been perfect for both families' needs, any one of those factors being different could have meant continued desperation for his family. But all the pieces had fallen into place, and now they had a chance to rebuild their lives in a way that could provide opportunities they never could have imagined. As he fell asleep next to his wife in their new bedroom, Miguel made a silent promise to justify the faith that had been placed in them, and to work harder than he ever had before to make this opportunity into something lasting and meaningful for his family. The inside of the McAllister ranch house was everything Miguel had imagined and more. Rich hardwood floors gleamed under warm lighting, and family photographs covered the walls, telling the story of generations who had called this place home. The furniture was well made and comfortable, the kind that spoke of prosperity built over decades rather than quick wealth. James McAllister's wife, Margaret, appeared from the kitchen wearing an apron dusted with flour. She was a woman in her late 40s with kind eyes and graying brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. When she saw the Santos family, her expression immediately softened with concern and understanding. "James, introduce me to our guests," she said warmly, wiping her hands on her apron before extending one to Elena. This is the Santos family, James explained. Miguel, Elena, and their 3 children. They're having some car trouble and need a place to stay tonight. Margaret's response was immediate and genuine. Of course they do. Children, are you hungry? I was just pulling a batch of cookies from the oven, and we have plenty of food left over from dinner. Carlos and Diego looked up at their parents uncertainly. They had learned to be wary of strangers over the past few weeks, but the smell of fresh-baked cookies and the warmth in Margaret's voice was hard to resist. It's okay, mijos, Elena said softly in Spanish. These are good people. While Margaret bustled around the kitchen preparing plates of food for the family, James pulled Miguel aside to the living room. Through the large windows, Miguel could see several other adults and teenagers gathered around a fire pit in the backyard. The McAllisters had clearly been hosting some kind of family gathering when he had interrupted their evening. I have to ask you something straight, James said, settling into a leather armchair and gesturing for Miguel to take the sofa. How did you end up in this situation? You seem like a capable man, and your wife and children are clearly well cared for despite your circumstances. Miguel appreciated the directness. It was better than pity or false sympathy. He took a deep breath and told James the whole story: the construction company's bankruptcy, the missed paychecks, the eviction, the weeks of searching for work while living out of their truck. He explained how his savings had been wiped out by Elena's difficult pregnancy and Sophia's premature birth, which had required an extended hospital stay. I've been working since I was 12 years old, Miguel said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. I've never been unemployed for more than a week in my entire adult life. I don't know how to do this, how to be without work, without a home for my family. I feel like I'm failing them every day. James listened without interruption, nodding occasionally. There was no judgment in his expression, only the focused attention of someone who understood that circumstances could change anyone's life in an instant. What kind of construction experience do you have? James asked when Miguel finished his story. Everything, really. I started as a laborer, but over the years I learned framing, electrical basics, plumbing, concrete work, finish carpentry. Rivera trusted me to oversee entire job sites. I can show you letters of recommendation if you want. I might take you up on that, James said thoughtfully. But, first, let me ask you this: if I offered you work, would you be willing to relocate? To live here on the ranch while you got back on your feet? Miguel's heart skipped a beat. The offer seemed too good to be true, and he had learned to be suspicious of anything that seemed too easy. What kind of work? I've been putting off some major renovations on the old foreman's house for months now. It's a 3-bedroom place about a quarter mile from here. The previous foreman retired and moved to town, and I haven't hired a replacement yet. The house needs new flooring, updated electrical, bathroom renovation, kitchen work, basically a complete overhaul. James stood and walked to the window, looking out at his property. I've been getting bids from contractors, but they all want to bring in their own crews and charge me premium prices for work I'm not sure will be up to my standards. If you're as skilled as you say you are, and if you're willing to do the work properly, I might have a proposition for you. I'm listening, Miguel said, hardly daring to breathe. You and your family can live in the main part of the house while you renovate it section by section. I'll pay you a fair wage for the work, provide materials, and cover your utilities. When the job is finished, if you want to stay on as ranch foreman, we can discuss a permanent arrangement. The offer was so generous, so perfectly suited to their needs, that Miguel felt like he was dreaming. But then, reality set in, and, with it, suspicion. Why would this man, who didn't know them at all, take such a risk on strangers? Sir, I have to ask, why would you do this for people you just met? How do you know we won't steal from you or disappear with your materials? James turned back to face him, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Fair question. The truth is, I don't know for certain that you won't. But I've learned to read people over the years, and you don't strike me as the type to bite the hand that feeds you. Besides, I wasn't always in this position myself. He sat back down and leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. 25 years ago, I was a young man with more ambition than sense, trying to make it as an independent cattle rancher. I had a small operation, barely making ends meet, when a drought wiped out most of my herd. I was about to lose everything when an older rancher named Bill Harrison took a chance on me. He hired me as his foreman, taught me the business, and eventually sold me this place when he retired. James gestured around the comfortable room. Everything you see here exists because someone was willing to help me when I was desperate. Bill used to say that success isn't just about what you accumulate, it's about what you pass along. I've been looking for the right opportunity to pay that kindness forward. Miguel felt emotion welling up in his throat. The idea that their desperate situation had somehow led them to exactly the right person at exactly the right time seemed too coincidental to be real. There's one more thing, James continued. Margaret and I never had children of our own. We've watched our nephews and nieces grow up, but we've always regretted not having a family here on the ranch. Having your children around, hearing their laughter, seeing the place through young eyes again, well, that would be a gift to us as much as our help would be to you. From the kitchen came the sound of Carlos and Diego laughing at something Margaret had said. Baby Sophia had woken up and was making the contented gurgling sounds that meant she was warm, fed, and happy for the first time in weeks. I need to discuss this with my wife, Miguel said, though he already knew what Elena's answer would be. Of course. Take your time. For tonight, you're welcome to stay in the guest room. Tomorrow morning I'll show you the foreman's house and we can go over the details of what needs to be done. They rejoined their families in the kitchen, where Margaret had set out an impressive spread of leftover barbecue, fresh bread, salad, and those cookies that had captivated the boys. Elena was attempting to communicate with Margaret through a combination of broken English and enthusiastic gestures, both women laughing at the linguistic challenges. Elena, Miguel said in Spanish, we need to talk about something important. As the family gathered around the kitchen table to eat their first real meal in days, Miguel explained James's offer. Elena's eyes grew wide with disbelief, then filled with tears of gratitude. Carlos wanted to know if they could see horses on the ranch, while Diego was more interested in whether there would be cookies available on a regular basis. The conversation continued late into the evening, with James and Margaret sharing stories about the ranch and the surrounding area. Miguel learned that the community was close-knit but welcoming to newcomers who were willing to work hard and contribute. There was a good school system and several other Latino families in the area who could help Elena feel more at home. As the night progressed, Miguel found himself relaxing for the first time in months. The constant tension of uncertainty, the daily stress of not knowing where they would sleep or when they would eat next, began to ease from his shoulders like a physical weight being lifted. When it was time to put the children to bed, Margaret led them to a guest room with twin beds and a crib she had retrieved from storage. The sheets smelled like lavender, and the beds were soft and welcoming. Carlos and Diego were asleep within minutes of their heads hitting the pillows, exhausted from the emotional upheaval of the day. Elena tucked baby Sophia into the crib, then turned to Miguel with tears in her eyes. Is this really happening? She whispered in Spanish. After everything we've been through, are we really going to have a home again? I think so, Miguel replied, holding her close. I think maybe we've finally caught the break we've been praying for. As they prepared for bed in a real room with clean sheets and privacy for the first time in weeks, Miguel reflected on the incredible turn their lives had taken in just a few hours. That morning he had been a desperate man with a broken truck and no prospects. Now he was looking at the possibility of stable work, a home for his family, and a future that extended beyond mere survival. But, even more than the practical benefits, what struck him most was the dignity with which James and Margaret had treated them. They hadn't been made to feel like charity cases or objects of pity. Instead, they had been welcomed as equals who happened to be going through a difficult time. Outside their window, Miguel could see the vast expanse of the ranch under starlight. It was beautiful and peaceful in a way that made him want to believe that their troubles were truly behind them. For the first time since his world had collapsed, he allowed himself to imagine a future where his children could grow up with stability, where Elena could feel secure, and where he could take pride in his work again. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and decisions, but tonight they were safe, fed, and surrounded by unexpected kindness. Sometimes, Miguel thought as he drifted off to sleep, miracles came disguised as ordinary people with extraordinary hearts. The old Ford pickup truck wheezed and coughed as it pulled over to the side of the dusty Texas road. Steam billowed from under the hood like a white flag of surrender. Miguel Santos sat behind the wheel for a moment, his calloused hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white. In the passenger seat, his wife Elena held their sleeping infant daughter close to her chest, while their two young sons, Carlos and Diego, stirred restlessly in the cramped space behind them. The summer of 1987 had been brutal in more ways than one. The construction company where Miguel had worked for 8 years had gone bankrupt, leaving him and dozens of other workers without jobs or final paychecks. Their small apartment in San Antonio had been lost to eviction 3 weeks ago, and, since then, the family of 5 had been living out of their truck, moving from one temporary shelter to another, always searching for work, always hoping for a break that never seemed to come. Miguel stepped out of the truck and lifted the hood. The radiator had finally given up completely, just like everything else in their lives seemed to be doing. He had maybe $40 left to his name, barely enough for gas, let alone a hotel room or decent meals for his family. The reality of their situation hit him like a physical blow to the chest. Here they were, stranded on a back road somewhere between Austin and Houston, with nowhere to go and no one to call. Elena emerged from the truck, gently bouncing baby Sophia to keep her calm. At 28, she had always been the optimist in their relationship, but Miguel could see the worry lines that had deepened around her eyes over the past few months. She had been a seamstress before Sophia was born, but finding work while caring for an infant and keeping their family together had proven impossible. "Papa, I'm thirsty," 6-year-old Carlos complained, tugging at Miguel's work shirt. His younger brother Diego, only 4, began to whimper as the heat inside the truck became unbearable. Miguel surveyed their surroundings with growing desperation. The road stretched endlessly in both directions, bordered by vast ranch lands that seemed to mock their predicament with their abundance. Cattle grazed peacefully in the distance, and he could see a ranch house perhaps a mile away across the fields. The irony wasn't lost on him, surrounded by all this wealth and prosperity, yet his family didn't even have a place to sleep tonight. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Miguel made a decision that would require him to swallow every ounce of pride he had left. He had never begged for anything in his life. He had worked since he was 12 years old, first helping his father in the fields, then learning construction skills that had provided steadily for his family until the world seemed to collapse around them. "Elena, I need you to stay here with the children," he said quietly in Spanish, not wanting Carlos and Diego to understand the full gravity of their situation. "I'm going to walk to that ranch house and ask if we can sleep somewhere on their property tonight. Maybe in a barn or something." Elena's eyes filled with tears she had been holding back for weeks. "Miguel, are you sure? What if they call the police? What if they think we're trying to steal something?" The fear in her voice was real and justified. They had encountered their share of hostility over the past few weeks, store owners who watched them suspiciously, hotel clerks who found excuses not to rent them rooms, and employers who took one look at Miguel's weathered appearance and immediately lost interest in his impressive work experience. "I have to try, mi amor," Miguel replied, touching her cheek gently. "Our children need a safe place to sleep, and I need to fix the truck tomorrow. If these people have any decency in their hearts, maybe they'll understand that we're not criminals, we're just a family in trouble." He began the long walk across the field toward the ranch house, each step feeling like it carried the weight of his family's future. The grass was dry and brittle beneath his work boots, and grasshoppers scattered with each footfall. The house grew larger as he approached, a beautiful 2-story structure with a wraparound porch and well-maintained grounds. Several expensive-looking vehicles sat in the circular driveway, and Miguel could smell barbecue smoke drifting from the backyard. As he got closer, he could hear laughter and conversation. It sounded like a family gathering or small party was taking place. The contrast between their joy and his desperation made his stomach clench with shame. Here he was, about to interrupt these people's pleasant evening to beg for charity. Miguel paused at the edge of the driveway, suddenly aware of how he must look. His work clothes were wrinkled and stained, his hair was uncombed, and he probably smelled like motor oil and sweat. These people lived in a world so different from his current reality that he might as well be from another planet. But then, he thought of Carlos asking for water, of baby Sophia sleeping fitfully in the heat, of Elena trying so hard to stay strong for all of them. He squared his shoulders and walked up to the front door. Before he could knock, the door opened. A tall man in his 50s stood there, wearing crisp jeans and a button-down shirt. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his boots looked like they cost more than Miguel used to make in a week. This had to be the rancher. He had that confident, successful bearing that came with owning land and livestock. "Can I help you?" the man asked, not unkindly, but with the wariness that property owners in rural areas often displayed toward unexpected visitors. Miguel removed his baseball cap and held it in both hands. "Sir, my name is Miguel Santos. I'm very sorry to bother you, but my family and I are stranded on the road out there. Our truck broke down, and we don't have money for a hotel. I was wondering. I was hoping you might let us sleep somewhere on your property tonight. Maybe in a barn or an empty building. We're not asking for charity. I'm willing to work. I can do construction, repairs, anything you might need." The rancher, who Miguel would later learn was named James McAllister, studied him for a long moment. Miguel could almost see him processing the situation, probably wondering if this was some kind of scam or setup. It was a reasonable concern. A stranger appearing at your door after dark with a sob story wasn't something most people would welcome. "You said your family is out there?" McAllister asked, gesturing toward the road. "Yes, sir. My wife and 3 children. The baby is only 8 months old, and my boys are 6 and 4. I know this is a lot to ask from a stranger, but we're good people in a bad situation. I've never had to ask for help like this before in my life." There was something in Miguel's voice, a combination of desperation and dignity, that seemed to reach McAllister. The rancher stepped out onto the porch and looked toward the road where the outline of the old pickup truck was barely visible in the fading light. "What kind of work did you say you do?" McAllister asked. "Construction mainly. Framing, roofing, concrete work. I was a foreman for Rivera Construction for 8 years until they went under last month. I can show you my tools if you want proof. They're in the truck." McAllister was quiet for several seconds, during which Miguel's heart hammered against his ribs. Everything depended on this moment, on this stranger's willingness to see past appearances and take a chance on them. "Tell you what," McAllister finally said. "Why don't you bring your family up to the house? It's getting dark, and the road can be dangerous at night. We'll figure something out." Miguel felt his knees go weak with relief. "Sir, I can't tell you what this means to us. I promise we won't cause any trouble. We'll leave first thing in the morning if you want." "Let's get your family first," McAllister said. "Then, we'll talk about what comes next." As they walked across the field together toward the broken-down truck, Miguel found himself fighting back tears of gratitude. He didn't know what the morning would bring, or whether this kindness would extend beyond one night of shelter, but, for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to feel something that had become foreign to him: hope. The rancher walked beside him in comfortable silence, and Miguel couldn't help but notice that the man didn't seem to be judging him or treating him like a charity case. There was a respect in his manner that suggested he understood that circumstances could humble anyone, and that asking for help didn't diminish a person's worth. When they reached the truck, Elena looked up with anxious eyes. Miguel spoke to her quickly in Spanish, explaining that the rancher had agreed to help them. The relief on her face was immediate and profound. "Mrs. Santos," McAllister said, tipping his hat politely, "I'm James McAllister. Why don't we get you and the children up to the house where it's more comfortable?" Elena's English was limited, but she understood enough to nod gratefully. As they gathered their few belongings and helped the children out of the truck, Miguel marveled at how a day that had started in despair was ending with this unexpected kindness from a complete stranger. Carlos and Diego stayed close to their parents, wide-eyed and uncertain about their new surroundings. Baby Sofia slept peacefully in Elena's arms, oblivious to the drama that was unfolding around her. As they walked back toward the ranch house, Miguel couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was somehow pivotal, that whatever happened next would change their lives in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The warm glow of lights from the McAllister house grew brighter with each step, like a beacon guiding them towards something better than the darkness they had been living in for so long. Sometimes the most extraordinary acts of kindness happen when we least expect them. In a world that often feels cold and disconnected, there are still moments that restore our faith in humanity. This is one of those stories, a true account of how a single conversation between two strangers on a dusty road in rural Texas changed the trajectory of an entire family's life forever. What you're about to read isn't just another feel-good tale. It's a raw, honest look at what happens when pride meets desperation, when judgment gives way to understanding, and when one person's willingness to see beyond appearances creates ripples that last for generations. This story will challenge what you think you know about success, failure, and the true meaning of wealth. The events that unfolded on that scorching summer evening in 1987 proved that sometimes our lowest moments can become the foundation for our greatest triumphs. But it all started with a father's desperate plea and a rancher's unexpected response that would echo through the decades to come.